Hey everyone, welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me Joseph Duis from Hersey Studios, which has created several comics, including Bless the Children, which is a horror western, manga style comic, Dr. Orange, as well as Two Eyed Tales, and superhero heresy. A little bit nervous, everybody, as well as the Order of Dracula, which is currently going on with its remaster on a Kickstarter. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, you don't have to be nervous around me. It's okay.
I'm always nervous when I do one of these, but I do enjoy the horror genre, and the indie comic realm is getting very, very interesting in that realm. I think it's one of the big things out of the indie comics. So I'm very curious where Heresy Studios kind of started and what was the formation like of that, because that's a cool company, and I think it's great what you're doing.
Yeah. So I had this idea when my wife was pregnant. I was like, I've always wanted to make comics. I tried doing that, and that didn't really work out. It's like submitting to publishers and stuff, and that didn't work out. I tried doing short stories and novels, and that didn't really work out. So I kind of went back to the comics, and I was like, you know what? If I'm gonna fail at something, at least it'll be something I enjoy doing. And I do like writing short stories and stuff, but it's not the same as comics for me. Um, so when my wife was pregnant for the first time, I was like, I'm getting kind of old. I'm 35, and I'm going to be spending all my time taking care of kids. So I need to do something. Like I feel like leave something behind. And obviously, if you have kids, you did leave something behind. But I kind of feel like, they want to, if they want to be their own selves and have their own legacy, it's fine with me. They don't have to do anything I want them to do necessarily. So I wanted to kind of leave some comics behind. So I first started to do the Top Cow contest, the talent search, and did not get picked for that. So then I actually submitted to Dark Horse. That didn't turn out. And then I just decided I went to Baltimore Comic Con in 2015. I used to live in the area, and I went and saw Tom King, and he used to be a CIA guy, so we're kind of the same situation. And so I was like, how did you go from this, from that to this? And he said that he just took some time off and started writing, and I was like, well, I have this script, and he's like, if you already have a script, you're like more than 90% of the people, you're ahead of 90% of the people, So like all you need to do now is just find an artist. So then that's kind of when I started doing it. And then for my birthday the following year, my wife started the company for me. So I'd have like some framework for doing that. So late 2016, it kind of started on the Order of Dracula. And came with that in 2017.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because I just actually put up the link to the Kickstarter. There's 4 days left on the remastered version, and that project is happening, which is very cool. So that's a very nice thing when a project is fully funded twice over.
Yeah.
And so this is happening, but this is a remastered. So this story, for those who don't know, deals with Dracula possibly teaming up or not teaming up with some Irish rebellions. There was the Irish War, the Black and Tans, which I still don't know which side. And technically, if you go into the wrong bar and order a Black and Tan, you could expect to be thrown out. Fair warning to everybody, make sure you know which side of the bar you should be on in that circumstance. But getting back to the story, it's very interesting that. So where did that idea come from?
So I was watching a bunch of Hammer horror movies, and I watched specifically I watched Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and I was like, this movie could just be so much better. A lot of those Hammer movies, like they're like, yeah, it's kind of cool and everything, but it's like, he doesn't even have any dialogue in the movie. Like he again, and then he gets killed again at the end, and in Scars of Dracula, which is another Hammer movie, he has a guy that he just tortures, and that's why the guy works for him. And in the original Dracula, there's a guy who's insane, and that's why he's working for Dracula. So I really wanted to find somebody who's living, who allies with Dracula for their own reasons and has agency. So that's kind of what the idea behind the Order of Dracula, where I wanted to sort of take the Hammer framework and kind of improve on it, and sort of give these secondary characters more of a starring role. I mean, Dracula doesn't even appear in the comic until page 14, and it's 30 pages. So so he's kind of a secondary character. But the Irish separatist is a main character, and so I came with the idea of people being motivated by ideology, about being motivated by politics, because ideas are the most powerful force in the world. People will do anything for them, and I came up with the Irish independence movement specifically because in the original Dracula, it takes place in London, and a lot of the Hammer movies take place in England and in the UK. So I thought about who would really have it out for the English at this time, and that's where I came up with the Irish separatist movement. The story takes place in 1900, so it's right at that time where it's just in the run up to the War of Irish Independence.
Yeah, and to talk about this, so you do this comic, and then you do a bunch of other comics, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but now you're going back to it and you're remastering it. And so, what is that like? Because I would imagine that certain elements of the story are slightly changed and improved upon. I would imagine there's sort of an upgrade to the art to some degree. Certain things probably are cleaner because, we improve as writers, podcasters, as creators. And so, what is that experience like? Because that's what this Kickstarter is dealing with. And it must be sort of cool to go back and say, oh man, I messed this up over here, and now I get the opportunity to fix it.
Yeah, I didn't have a ton of space to fix stuff because I wanted to keep the same art, and I actually was pretty happy with the art. Mostly because I didn't do it, but yeah. So Don Cardenas and Rebecca McConnell were our original art team, and it's the same artwork, it's the same line work, it's same coloring. But I wanted to go back and redo the lettering because I wasn't too happy with it. And I also kind of wanted to change the cover and some of the back and front matter. I kind of made the original one as put some stuff in the back matter about how I got into making comics and all this stuff. But I figured at this point, it's probably not that important. So I wanted to kind of give it the feel of a late Silver, early Bronze Age comic. So I found some public domain ads from comic books, and I stuck that in the back. And then I wanted to advertise Crusade of Dracula, which is going to be our next one with the same characters. So I put that on the back cover. I got a new cover from Donnie Nita Black, who actually lives in Northern Ireland, lives in Belfast. So I'd gotten her to do a Two-Eyed Tales cover. So I really like that one. So I basically just gave her a basic idea, and she just kind of runs with it.
Yeah, and even to talk further about this Kickstarter, because I don't want to ruin too much of this story, because I want people to actually go out and buy the book and support you and check it out, because it's an enjoyable read, and it's definitely got a nice twist to it. So, what are some of the rewards and things that you're offering with this Kickstarter? Because there are 4 days left. It is, as I stated, happening. The link's up on those who are watching this live or on replay. You can easily click on that link. So there are 4 days, and this project is happening versus other Kickstarters that are more of a gamble. And you've delivered on all 5 of your other Kickstarters, and this is your 6th, just to give you trust and authenticity and authority in this space.
Yeah. So this is a quick starter. So there's certain guidelines you have to follow. And one of them is that it's got to be 20 days or less. So I did it at 14 days. One of the other things is you have 2 months between the time you conceive of the idea and when you launch the project. No more than that. So you also only have 24 hours to make and edit the video. So I made it as simple as possible, and pretty much said, like, if I'm just going to do this and I want to fulfill it quickly and I'm going to get it done quickly, I'm just going to make the rewards really simple. So there's just the main book, the remaster book that has a new cover, and then we take the two previous covers, and then we make a remaster version of those two covers. So we had 3 covers altogether. And then we have a deluxe edition that has the script and the commentary pages. There's an original theme song, and then at the highest level there's original art pages. But the other levels are really just other comics that we've done or contributed to. So it looks kind of complicated because there's 10 reward tiers, but it's really not.
Yeah, and everybody, if you like Dracula and all that stuff, links up 4 days, as I keep on saying, this project is happening. And so it's very cool. And I like that. And also it's done. And I do want to make it a point. When do you expect that people will get this book into their hand? Because it sounds like most of it is done and it just needs to be printed.
Yeah, it's pretty much done. I'm going to go over it one more time. I actually have proof copies already, but I'm going to go over it one more time and just make some tweaks to make sure that it's 100% the way I want it. But yeah, there's going to be no drawings this time, so it's pretty much done. So to put in the print order, wait for the print order to come in. I think I gave it 4 months, 3 to 4 months to just get done, but it hopefully will not take that long. But you never know. Last time I put a print order in, it took me like a month and a half to get it afterwards. So it's unpredictable. So I just gave it a little bit of time just in case.
And now I want to table this, and we're going to come back to this in a few minutes, but I do want to talk about some of your other work, because I think your other work is just as good. And your other work sort of is in more my field of what I enjoy. Not saying I don't enjoy vampires. I'm a big Van Helsing fan. That show on Sci-Fi is killing it. Just putting it out there. But I do want to talk about another book that was shorter, sort of manga stylish, and that's your Western horror, Bless the Children. And a lot of shit's going on in this book. If I could say it, and it's only 15 pages, but just give a really quick background. Basically got a guy named Winter, Mr. Winter. I think his name is Edsel Winter. And he comes back on a failed Western expansion or expedition. His family was with him. His family's now not with him. Comes to this abandoned town. And, well, he's seeing kids, and we sort of don't know if those kids are real, those kids not real. People are pretending they're not real. They might be imaginary. And so a lot of complicated stuff, hints of cannibalism, hints of, speaking to the dead type in there, and possibly craziness and mental anguish. And we sort of discover some stuff. So what was this like, getting to play with all these elements? Because it's fascinating to combine all this, and then on top of that, to do that in 15 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to get stuff as short as it will get.
The lost art.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think an original draft it was a couple of pages. It was 2 or 3 pages longer, but I just cut it down. But yeah, so I like psychological stuff a lot, and I think comic books are pretty uniquely suited to that, because it's almost like it involves the reader in the experience, because the reader's kind of controlling the pace. And I did it probably more in Dr. Orange, which is even a more psychological comic. But the one in Bless the Children, I kind of had this idea. I was looking up some stuff about the original comics, and it was sort of stylistically inspired by the first, sort of considered to be the first comic book that just came out of Switzerland. And we sort of went with that. That was sort of a social satire. But I was like, what if I did that, but I made like a horror comic out of it instead? So I wanted to do something about westward, its expansion, some kind of frontier type of horror story. Probably ever since I saw Ravenous like 20 years ago. But but I was like, I gotta do something like that. So I started thinking about it, and I was thinking about like, kids, especially if they're silent, they're always kind of scary. If you have kids, if they're silent, something's wrong. Something terrible's happening. But yeah, so it's part of it, and kind of put some religious fanaticism in there, which I think we have kind of a touch of that in all of our comics. And I kind of started thinking about like, what if the villain has like sympathetic motives, and so all that kind of came together, in that one, little black and white story, and that was, one of the stories we put in Two Eyed Tales too. So I've already written the prequel to that too, but I have to work on that at some point.
Yeah, and I loved Bless the Children because I thought it was so interesting, and I thought it was, as I stated, a lost art to write short. I like to write short for a reason because I like to get to the point and be done with it and then move on to the next point. I think that's what this comic did. I think it hit all the bells and whistles that it needed to hit in the allotted time. But I think that this was sort of buried underneath Dr. Orange in many ways, and I am a big psychological thriller guy. I had Russell Nolte on, and he does Ichabod Jones, Monster Hunter, and that's a massive psychological thriller. And I thought Dr. Orange was in that league in many ways, where we get hallucinations and we get that feeling and we experience hallucinations. And if anybody's ever hallucinated and they're reading this comic, it hits that nice narrow target that's not so easy to hit. And there's a lot of stuff going on with this, and we don't know what's real, what's not real. And also, I thought it was a nice little tribute to the Headless Horseman to some degree as well. So what was this entire thing like? Because it's definitely Halloween-oriented, and I love Halloween comics.
Yeah, so I wrote it as a short story back when I was trying to write short stories. It was, I think, 2011. And I came to the idea so I was on shift work then. Well, I'm on shift work again now, but yeah, I was on shift work. It was my first shift work then, and so I was always home when my wife wasn't home. So, I'm really the only one in the family who really likes to carve jack-o'-lantern. It's like the tradition for me. So I was like going out on the balcony and I was carving a pumpkin, and nobody was around, and I was like, well, if I just like slip and I cut myself and I bleed out, like nobody's going to notice for a long time. And that was my original thought that kind of led to this. And I started thinking like, if I were less stable and I had done this and I didn't want to take responsibility for it, maybe I survived, and maybe I would say that the pumpkin, was responsible. So that's where I kind of came up with this idea. And I wrote this short story, and I think I just called it The Pumpkin. And it was a little different than it turned out, but it was a little simpler in some ways. But I just kind of banged it out like the next day, and then I lost the story, and I kind of forgot about it for a while. And then we started making comics. I was like, what can I take? What of these old stories can I take and sort of repurpose them and make them better? So that's when I thought about The Pumpkin, and I just kind of changed a bunch of stuff in it. I think it's a lot better. Ended up a lot better than the original version. But, just kind of that idea of like, what is reality? Something that we come back to in a lot of our comics is, what's a reality, perception versus reality. Actually, a guy that I went to high school with is a psychiatrist now, so I talked to him about that. Just trying to make it, very accurate, just to get the dosages right and everything. Just to make that just seem really realistic, but at the same time, it seems like it's not realistic. It seems like it's a figment,
And to talk even further about this, because I think you do hit it right on the nail. head. And I think that you drive in what it actually means to have, I guess, schizophrenia and those hallucinations and whatever this main character has. I didn't pick up what exactly was revealed to be, but clearly there's a mental instability in her, and I think you hit it perfectly on the head, and it's very unique, and in many ways it raises mental health issues. And I don't know if that was your intention, but it's always nice when a comic does something accurate and does something respectful. And so I think that that's a very nice touch with Dr. Orange. And I think it's
Yeah, I mean, I think
an
it's
improvement to you in many ways as a writer.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was that was really one of my concerns about it, is to make sure that it's realistic, and if it's realistic, then it's respectful. Um, you know, schizophrenia is something where it's genetic, but there's also a cultural component to it, and different cultures experience it differently. So kind of went into a deep dive and try and figure out, which one I think, which sort of cultural expression I thought was the most interesting, and I kind of went with that, and made it seem like, and then I talked to my psychiatrist friend the whole time, and I was like, is it like bad if I do this, is it bad if I do that? The whole thing about, so the whole thing about they're having dreams and waking up and not sure if it's reality. I just kind of put that in the story, and I was like, I don't know if this is like really realistic or not. But I talked to him, and he was like, yeah, that's pretty common. Like, if you can't tell what reality is, a lot of times you can't also tell that you're in a dream. So that was sort of the building block of, just the idea that you can't tell what's real and what isn't. And then, also sort of reinforcing it with the sort of isolated idea, and I wanted to kind of have, I don't have too many characters in there. I don't like making characters, so I have like a handful of characters in there. But I also wanted to kind of reinforce the idea that, like, just because there's somebody living in the house with you, or you have loved ones, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't feel isolated. So there's a lot of different ideas in it.
And this was rather successful because it did constitute a second print, which is available off of the first run on Kickstarter. And that's always a good sign when you have to print a second one and you're hopefully going to have to print a third one. And in this second print, a few other stories were sort of told and added to it. Mary Revised was added to it. A reprint, I think, of How the West One was printed in there from another comic that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And I think those two were added to it. So that's cool, where you turn this into almost a mini anthology and paired it nicely with those two books. So what was that like, getting the ability to create sort of a miniature anthology of other works and pulling from what you've already done? So I think it says something about what you're doing and going along the right track here.
Yeah, Mary Revised was something that I did for another anthology book, and it's only 8 pages. And when the Dr. Orange Kickstarter was so successful, I was like, you know what, I'll just put it in there. Like, I'll just put it in the back, and then it'll be a little bit longer. Dr. Orange is like 22 pages, so I was like, just put that in there, and it's kind of a normal size comic. So when the Kickstarter backers got it, they got an extra story.
Which
so
they appreciate. They appreciate, because I support on Kickstarter. And when somebody tells me I'm getting something extra, I always appreciate it.
Yeah. So we're not going with stretch goals with this because it's a quick starter. So they say no stretch goals, not make it too complicated. But yeah, with that one, we just did that. Actually, the same thing with Bless the Children. We had another story in there that just gave them PDF. So then Sun put that in there, and then gave us all the Kickstarter backers. Had a handful of copies left over, but I had also contributed to another anthology as a public domain superhero anthology, but the anthology never went out. So that was a 12-page story, How the West Won. And so then I had this story, and I just wasn't doing anything with it. So when I went to conventions and I printed up some new Dr. Orange copies, and I just put that in the middle. So that was actually it was pretty good, I think, because people, then they got like a 44 pages, 42 story pages, like all in one comic. So when you do a lot of short form stuff, sometimes people like eventually like, don't you have anything longer, So.
And to talk about how the West won, that kind of expanded outward into its own book. And I might get the name wrong, and you'll correct me, but I believe that book is Super Heresies or Heresies.
Heresies, yeah.
And so that's sort of a golden age superhero book. But what's unique about this is that, from my understanding, that all these heroes are public domain heroes, meaning that anybody can use them. And I've never heard of that, by the way. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people watching and are going to be watching this have never heard about that either. So how does that work, and where do you even go to find these characters? Because that is mind-blowing to me, that there are even heroes out there, because the superhero genre to me is less than 100 years old at this point. And I don't know full copyright and public law dominion stuff, but yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, and I'm sure a lot of people are.
Yeah, so I guess I'll explain the legal part of it first, which is that the previous copyright law in the United States, you had to renew a copyright every 28 years. If you didn't do it, then it fell into public domain. And then the second major aspect of it was, if you did not put a proper copyright notice, then it was automatically in public domain when it was published. So all these Golden Age heroes that fell into the public domain was one of those cases or the other, mostly because they didn't renew them. Because, in the early 1940s, superheroes were like so big that all these companies kind of sprang up overnight. They started making superheroes left and right. There are hundreds and hundreds of them. And then by the end of the 1940s, you could hardly find any superhero comics. They were just, nobody wanted them anymore. So all those companies that had made all their money on the backs of superheroes suddenly went under, and they did not bother to renew the copyrights because the companies didn't exist anymore, and they didn't have any intentions of publishing them further. So there are a lot of public domain superheroes out there. There's a site called Public Domain Superheroes. The URL is pdsh.wikia.com, and it's a crowdsourced database of public domain superheroes, and it does not have all of them, but it has a lot of them. So that's kind of where I start when I look for them. And then once I find something in there, then I go to there's either one of two sites, comicbookplus.com or digitalcomicmuseum.com, and they both have free to read scanned copies of most of those comics. So you can go in there, you can spend the rest of your life reading public domain comics and not pay a dime for it. They do accept donations, but yeah, it is free to have an account. It's free to read there. So what I did was I kind of found some characters I wanted to use, and then read up on all their appearances, which in a lot of cases wasn't very many. Yeah, and then I just kind of use them from there, and anybody can do that. There's been a lot of other comic projects that have used old comic book characters, or even old literature characters like Dracula, or even movies. There's I think one of the most famous public domain movies is Night of the Living Dead. They did not properly mark that. So Night of the Living Dead is public domain. House on Haunted Hill, the original one, is public domain. So there's some surprising stuff there. And of course, in the United States, everything before 1925 is public domain, just because it's expired by now. So anything every year, January 1st is public domain day, and they just put everything in there that's 95 plus years old. So there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, no, that is wild to me, and that is awesome. So, what is that like? Because in many ways, you're bringing up characters and you're almost, I don't want to say rebirthing them, but reviving them sort of from a grave to some degree. Because you have three stories in this, and not saying these characters are super popular, but they're not dead now, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So what is that like? Because that must be like a creator's ultimate goal, and obviously the people who probably created them are dead, but even still, it's kind of like their legacy is living on also, and it's sort of a passing of the torch in a very indie way, for lack of a better word. I don't know how to. I don't I have no idea how to phrase this question, but I think I got to the heart of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all like that, because at the time, these creators, they were, I mean, they joked about them being, leg manacled to their desks, by the publishers. But I mean, that was basically the attitude: is that like, hey, we got, a bi-monthly 64-page comic, we got to fill with stuff, so there's a ton of creators out there who just were like, and they were mostly anthology books then. So, um, you would have 9 or 10 stories in there, um, and they would usually not name them after the characters because they wanted to be able to switch the characters out if they weren't popular. So, so you'd have a bunch of stories in there, and the publisher would go, okay, I want you to do this, and they would create a character and they'd have a story, and they'd go, okay, well, we're doing it next time too. At 2 months, we're doing the same character. So come up with, X amount of pages. Maybe it was 8 or 6 or 7 or 9, but it's always a small amount of pages. And say like, okay, you have, 2 months to get this done. So then they would do it, and then they might have a second appearance, or they might not. Or they might have 10, or they might have 5, or they might have 20. But then they would say, yeah, this character isn't popular anymore. We're kicking them out of the book. So then you would never see them again. And so then they would say, all right, now create somebody else. So, it was all these characters that were just created and were abandoned, and then when it came time to renew the copyrights, the companies didn't exist anymore. So, that a lot of these characters had a lot of potential, but, they were just really sort of summarily dropped. And some of them never had origins. Some of them never had real names. Some of them never had superhero names. So, there's a lot of development potential.
Yeah, I'm about to say that because now you essentially have sort of the character designed. You have a little bit of their background, but you don't have their future planned out there and written. Versus a mainstream character like that DC has developed 15 times, might I add. And you also don't have their prequel and their origin stuff. So, what is that like? Because I don't want to say the work is done per se, but you got a good starting block and you got a head start when you're handed a character and you can burn both ends of the wick. And also with this comic, it must give you a lot of leeway and you can go in almost any direction you want to go in with it. And so, what is that like? Because that must be like a creator's dream to some degree.
Yeah, and public domain characters, you can do whatever you want with them. You can actually just say, you know what, everything that happened to them before is not canon. It doesn't matter. I'm starting from scratch. I didn't want to do that, particularly with this particular comic, but yeah, I mean, I've seen people do that. I've seen people redesign it for modern age or later age. Um, I kind of wanted to keep them in their milieu in the 40s and 50s, and just kind of bring them incrementally forward, from a sort of a World War II environment to a Cold War environment, because the Cold War has always been pretty interesting to me. But yeah, so it's kind of nice in that sense because you don't have to create the character. You just sort of have to say, okay, I'm going to fill in the blanks. And the other good thing about it is, once you've read the public domain stuff, you don't have to do any more research because if anybody's used them since then, it's copyrighted. So, you really don't want to read that stuff because you don't want it to influence, your own take. and then possibly commit copyright violation. So so yeah, that's also a good thing about it.
And one of the things about this book is that there's 3 covers out there. There's cover A, B, and C, and I think they're up for pre-order, from my understanding, on your website.
Yep.
The Kickstarter was also very successful. And you're going to notice a common theme here. Every one of your Kickstarters does well. And so what is that like to really get to do 3 covers for this book and put some real faith behind it and get to tell these stories because they're cool, and I'm hoping you do more.
Yeah, it was a really tough Kickstarter. It was in November. It was like November 4th to 22nd. So it was 18 days. I was like, I don't think I need more than 18 days, which I didn't, but I didn't know that. So I was like, I wanted to get it done before Thanksgiving. It ended 6 days before Thanksgiving. So so I was like, let's just get it done so we get it done before the end of the year. And it was like dead except for like 4 or 5 days of the campaign. So like it was just like really, really slow. So I was losing faith in it. Luckily, I had some pretty good. The first 2 days are pretty good, and the last day was good, and I had a couple other good days in there, and it was enough. But you kind of lose faith, and you're like, man, I had 3 covers for this. Like I don't know if it was like a good investment.
So let's talk about that, because clearly that was probably a learning experience for you, when to do a Kickstarter, when not to do a Kickstarter, in many ways. And what was that experience like? Because everybody has a different Kickstarter story. Both fans have that, creators have that. People fail sometimes in their first Kickstarter. Sometimes people fail in their second Kickstarter, and then sometimes people have opinions. My guest last night had a very strong opinion on the pitfalls of Kickstarter. Not to throw him under the bus, I think he made some valid points. So I'm just curious on that with this. What was that entire experience like, and what did you learn from it? Because I would imagine that affected your other Kickstarters you've done and will continuously do.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I learned about that is not to launch on a Monday. That was the first time I ever launched on a Monday. I kind of did it as an experiment because I was like, I've tried some other days. Let's just try it Monday. And I think because I didn't want to wait till Tuesday. That was like how dominant the whole thing was. But yeah, I was like, because I'd done Tuesday a lot of times, and I was like, I had done Tuesday and Friday. But I did Monday, and you read this stuff that people of Kickstarter are saying like, yeah, I've done a Kickstarter on Monday, and it's a bad idea because everybody's at work and everybody's doing work and they're catching up from the weekend, and they're catching up on emails, and they're at work on Tuesday, but they've already sort of cleared that queue. And yeah, that was my experience on Monday. It was not a great time to launch. I thought it was kind of slow because it was November, but eventually we ended up funding, and it was probably the second, I guess the third highest I've ever raised. So it wasn't bad, and we beat the goal by about, I guess, probably almost $500. So so I might do November again, if I really feel like I need to. But yeah, Monday was probably a bad idea. And I've heard people say don't launch between Memorial Day and Labor Day. But I haven't really seen that it's made a difference to me. I did a couple in August. This one we started it right before Memorial Day. Yeah, I think the rest of them were like January, February. But yeah, I don't know. Everybody have different ideas. I'm kind of not really like a Kickstarter guru, but you learn stuff. You learn some things not to do, some things to do. But a lot of times it really depends on what works. Really depends on who the audience is you're talking to. So I don't know if I have like any advice that's really great for everybody.
Fair enough, fair enough. And then I briefly want to touch upon a book we sort of skipped because it kind of led that way in, but that is your anthology of Two-Eyed Tales. and Bless the Children was in this sort of at the back end of it, but there was some new material in there as well, including sort of a Cat and Mouse, which is a Japanese vibe manga style, definitely game show oriented, and Japan is famous for their crazy game shows. And so that was kind of the main story. And not everything is as it seems in this one, and got that more thriller element to it. So, what was that like getting to draw in the manga style and definitely having that Eastern influence versus the Western influence that's been in your other work? Because I'm a big Japanese anime fan, and I love when I combine West versus East type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, we tend to put a lot of barriers between Western style comics and manga. There's really no reason to do that. I think
It's a bad idea, but these comic companies they don't like doing that, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And I haven't had as much exposure to manga as the Western comics, but but certainly there's like a handful of manga horror comics that I really like. So my main thing is like, let's just go, and if it's in Japan, let's just like put it in a manga style. And that was my thought about it. It's interesting because it's definitely a little bit faster of an art style to get done. And I like it. I like it for certain types of stories, certain types where I don't like it. But yeah, there's actually another manga type story that we did that has not gotten out yet. But it's was supposed to be an anthology.
It's coming. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. It's supposed to be an anthology, but the anthology hasn't gone out yet. So, but it's completely done. It's a 4-page, completely silent story. So, so I'll do that, and I think we probably might do one more manga type story sometime soon. And, I also like doing manga style stories because they're expected to be in black and white, and I like a lot of black and white stuff. But with manga, like nobody's like, why isn't it in color? So
it's a nice touch about manga. It is, in which I read a lot of manga. I read a lot of American comics, and it's nice to not have color. I hate to say it. I love color. Don't get me wrong. But it's nice not to have color sometimes. And sometimes it's just like, oh, okay, I get it. And I see the fine lines. And it's a nice touch when you get that. And you kind of, I don't want to say raw or it seems unprofessional. But it's nice just to see the clean line work on something. And I think that's something that was cool about this. And also, the reason why I bring this up is because here we have Dr. Orange, which is fully color and a lot of obscure things in there. And then we have this manga thing. We still have some obscure stuff going on, but we kind of have the other side of the spectrum. And I think it's always nice when creators get to do both and are not a one-trick pony.
Yeah. And I actually thought about doing Dr. Orange in black and white, but I was like, I can't do that. Can't call a comic Dr. Orange every black and white.
It would have been such a troll move, and I would have thought it was funny. It would have been so trolly, and it would have been great. But I digress right there. That's my opinion.
But so I was like, if I'm going to do it in color, I'm just going to go and use color to the best advantage that I can. So I told Milana Ferris, who was our colorist, I said, just make everything in fall colors, just make it seem like everything's in fall. Like just make it seem unrealistic where everything in the house is in fall colors. All the clothes are in fall colors, everything. And he took it like even further than I thought he was going to. Like he was like, I'm making everything orange, and he made the walls orange and he made the clothes orange. Everything is different shade of orange. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Then he sends me the page with the dog, and the dog is orange. And I'm like, okay, I think that's a little bit too much. Like, just keep the dog white, Like, I think the dog's going to be camouflage if it's orange, Just keep the dog white, That was the only thing I said, is just keep the dog white, and everything else can be orange. So And then with Super Heresies, we wanted to make everything flat color, because to kind of, and then I put a filter over it. That I halftone filter over it to make it look like it was an older comic. So there's those degrees as black and white. Then there's just flat color, and then you have like the full renderings.
And then getting back to Two-Eyed Tales, there was two more stories. They were obviously shorter. One of them was Once Upon a Horn, which is about a unicorn that a girl gets for her 8-year-old birthday. And, well, you can imagine which way that goes if we're talking about a horror comic. And then there was the other one where an exterminator in Death Heads basically doesn't kill all these insects. And, well, insects scared the shit out of me. So I was not thrilled with this one, for many reasons, and so we're gonna leave that one alone because that one, not my cup of tea. And I think insects scare a lot of people to some degree. I think they do. That's why we have exterminators. If people weren't scared of insects, we wouldn't hire an exterminator because people would do it themselves. I'm the first person to call an exterminator. So we're going to leave it at that. But I thought it was a nice touch to throw into this as well because they are shorter stories and they definitely go a different direction than the manga goes in. And I thought it was nice.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with the way that one turned out. It was I found like the exact right font for the title for that, and I was just like overjoyed for weeks. That's like how weird I've gotten about fonts, but actually, was it based on a true story? So you probably don't want to hear that if you're afraid of insects, but I used to work in Alabama, and I lived in Tennessee, and it was a 90-mile drive, and I don't know if you've been to Alabama in the summer, but it's like there's like weird insects everywhere. So a butterfly moth got into my car, and I was driving home, and I had to pick my kids up, and I had to be there. You have to be there by 6, or else I don't know what they do to your kids. They sell them to into slavery or something. But so I had to be there by 6 to pick them up, and it's a long drive, but I had kind of I have a limited amount of time to get there. So the butterfly moth was in my car, and I didn't realize that until I was on the interstate. And I'm driving there, and I'm like, this thing is just so annoying to me. I'm not like phobic of bugs, but I kept thinking about scenarios in which it like gets in my face and I have an accident, and I'm like, I can't do that. And it's not dangerous. It's a butterfly moth. But so I kept trying to get it, and I was like rolling down the window. I was going 80 miles an hour. Rolling down the window, trying to get the thing to fly out, and it would do this irritating thing where it folds up the wings so it's no longer aerodynamic, so then it doesn't go out of the window. And I'm just like, and I'm trying to drive at the same time, and I don't want to stop because I don't want to be late. So I'm like driving down 80 miles an hour, trying to get this thing out of the car. I'm like trying different windows, and the thing that's irritating about it is like, as soon as I close the window, it starts flying around. It's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm just going to fly around until you close the window, to open the windows. Then I'm not going to do it anymore. So, it was like on the dashboard, it was on the seat, it was like on the steering wheel, it was like everywhere. So, finally I had to wait until it landed like directly on me right here. And then I just picked it up by the wing and I threw it out the window. And that was and it took me about 45 minutes to get that thing out of the car. So that was my inspiration for that story. Cause I was like, I want to put something else in Two-Eyed Tales. Cause everything else had been published previously. I was like, I want to put something in there. It just kind of gives people something new. So I wrote that, and it ended up being 6 pages, and just put that in there. But yeah, it's if you're afraid of insects, it's probably not a great story for you, man.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not a fan of insects. They are not my cup of tea. Yeah, I'm not a fan of aliens that look like insects either, but I can tolerate that a little bit better. I have a fear of bees, and they scare the shit out of me. In particular, yellow jackets.
Yeah, I mean it's a little understandable. Yeah.
I had a bad experience, and I don't want to talk about it. But having said all that, we just covered a lot of your work and everything that this company has done and is pushing out there. But there is something that's unique, and you know Chuck Pino, and
Yeah.
Chuck Pino did Welcome to the Void, and I hope I'm getting that right. And you have an interesting, I guess, collaboration where you and a bunch of other people have a comic called The Advocator Presents, and it's the winter edition. And I'm going to take a leap of faith here, but I'm assuming there are other editions coming possibly with this, dealing with different seasons and different comics, or it might have been a one shot. I don't know the full extent, but it's sort of a sampler of a bunch of comics. And it's kind of cool because I think that's something that's not happening on the indies, and especially in the indie comic world. And what's cool about this and what you sell on your website is that there's different variants. So there's different covers of different comics. I think there's one for Broken Down in Four Bodies. I think there's one that Welcome to the Void is on the cover. I think there's one for Binary Star. And I think there's a few others as well as there's a regular cover. So what was that like and how did that come about? Because that's something that I don't see other companies doing. And I think it's so interesting. And I think it's so smart. And I think that other companies should be doing that, and they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Rob Anderson was his idea. He's always trying to advocate for Guerrilla Creators. And he kind of realized he didn't really have the bandwidth to do all the sort of organizational and editing things. So he got Travis Gibb to do that. So he just kind of reached out to some of us and just to do 4-page stories. And some people can't do a complete story in 4 pages. And actually, I didn't either with this one because I put Mary of Eyes in there, which is 8. So we split into two issues. But yeah, so it was like, if you have an indie comic series, put 4-page story in there, and it's kind of like an ad for your comic series. But it's completely original, and it's something you can't find, in the main series. And so we kind of collaborate on that. And then we did the winter edition, which is the first one. And then we did the summer edition. There was no spring. And then we did the fall one. And then the fall one, I didn't write any of the stories in it, but I lettered one of the stories in there. And then this year, they're just going to go to just one per year. So hopefully, looks like I'll have a story in that one too. So
It's very cool, and the reason why I bring it up is that in many ways, people who go and support in Kickstarter, money, you might have to choose based on your monetary position, but now you could be exposed to a bunch of creators, and then on top of that, I might not know a creator, but I might know this other creator, and you're both in the book, and now I'm getting exposed, and it's almost a marketing ploy to some degree, and it's exposing and growing the audience. And so, what is that like to be part of that? And because I would imagine it helps tremendously in that realm. That was my first reaction. I think a lot of people are going to have that reaction too, as well
yeah,
as I say it's sort of like a sampler because you're getting 4, 5, 6 stories in there, and like, oh man, I didn't know this story existed, and oh man, now I want to read Welcome to the Void, or I want to read Binary Star, or I want to read Mary Revised, or Modern Testament was in there as well. And I know some of these stories, but I don't know every single one of these stories. So it's interesting on that realm.
yeah, yeah. I think it's really great. It's funny. There was a friend of mine from work who I only sort of know virtually, who works in Tampa, and she goes to Comic Cons in Florida, which it's kind of far for me to go there. I live in Colorado now, so so I don't really go too far for cons. But there was, but yeah, so she went to one there, and she ended up buying one for Rob Anderson, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I read your story," and I was like, "How did you do that?" So because you're not really used to people. Usually you know who's bought your stuff. Unless it's Comixology, when you find out 4 months later when you get your 3 cent check or whatever. But and even then you don't know who it is. You just know somebody bought it. So but yeah, you usually you don't hear from people who say, yeah, I read your comic, and you have no idea who they are. Um, so I thought that was really cool because it was like
Right?
somebody that I knew sort of in my professional job, and she had read something of mine because she bought it from him. So I think that's really the cool part of it is and you get copies of it. All the creators get copies of it after the Kickstarter's over, so you can sell it yourself and when you go to cons and online. So
So just sort of talk about that because you clearly are in Colorado. And so when I go to a con, I tend to stay local because I'm in DC. And so I don't get, certain experiences and vibes. And that's how the indie market is in many ways, where a lot of people stay local or they stay within their state, or if they're sort of bordering another state, they might take a long trip out there once every year or once every 2 years. And so, what is that like, and what does that seem like? Because clearly, Comic Cons and the indie comic scene is kind of a wreck at the moment, and
yeah,
not because of the business side or anything like that. It's just that we're sort of in a suppressed environment where nobody
yeah,
knows what's about to happen next with all this stuff. And I know Florida is sort of reopening, and Tampa said, "Hey, we're going ahead with this con." But let's be realistic here. How many people are going to be going to that con so quickly? Even if it's safe to go out, and I use air quotes.
yeah, yeah. So I never did any cons until probably 2017. No, 2018 maybe.
So you're new to
Yeah,
it.
I think 2018 when I first started doing them. That was when I was living in Tennessee, and so I had about like a 2 hour radius. So anything outside of that, cons are usually a waste of money for me. So like if
The unfortunate
like
side
if
effect.
I have to if I have to fly there or I have to get a hotel, like forget it. Plus I have 3 kids, and my wife's a doctor, so it's not like it's like, oh, is my wife staying home? It doesn't matter. So so I just go to places that were within 2 hours. So I went to some in northern Alabama. I went to some in Kentucky. But yeah, it's a pretty limited range. Some of these creators, they're going everywhere around the country. Some of them are never doing conventions. I haven't done any this year. But even
Rightfully
if,
so. Rightfully so. If your wife's a doctor, she'll
yeah,
slap you if you go to one of these.
yeah,
Just
um,
saying. Just saying.
yeah, yeah.
That's a
So
natural expectation. Just saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I like, so even before COVID happened this year, I was like, let's look and see, because I just moved here in January. Like, let's look and see and what the local conventions are, and pretty much all of them were like on days I had to work, and it's like it's probably not worth going. So I never actually signed up for anything this year. Then the most of them got canceled anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's an unfortunate side effect for those who don't know. A lot of cons they charge money. Con tables, and even if you're table sharing, can be expensive.
yeah,
And it's one of those things where it's really hard to break even. And even for a lot of these big guys, it's really hard to break even. And then even going further, a lot of the people at some of these big cons, what they get is they actually get a free table. So all the DC Marvel people get a free table, and then they're charging you $15 for a CGC autograph. You
yeah,
know, and there's nothing wrong with that. They deserve to be
yeah,
paid for it, but they're also getting a free table, while the indie people costs $500 for a table, and they're selling you a $5 to $10 book, and it's very backwards. Is what the con scene is like, because it should be the exact opposite. And it's unfortunate because all those big boys in DC, Marvel, and some of the Image people really do not need a free table. And the indie
Yeah.
creators need it more, or they need a cheaper table. And well, cons don't get it. And that kind of leads me to my next question to you: is that where do you think the state of indie comics is going? Because to me, it seems that not next year, but indie comics are starting to grow a lot more and take over, and DC and Marvel and even parts of Image are getting sort of stale. And there's also a big gap. Image's winning horse, The Walking Dead, has been out now for 18 months, I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's going to depend really on the individual circumstances of each creator. I know we're looking at 41 million unemployment applications in the past 6 weeks in the United States. So,
I mean,
that's going to
as a whole, I mean, I'll ask it because I know where you're going with this, and I think a lot of people do.
yeah,
But I'm just curious where you think that the state of indie comics is going, because it's been, in my opinion, growing massively. Where 5 years ago, it wasn't really a thing for me on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter was new at that point. But now
yeah,
I'm looking at Kickstarter and I'm seeing some amazing talent that I've never heard of before come out and doing some amazing stories. And you also put those books, those physical copies, next to a DC or Marvel book, and the only difference is the label on it.
yeah,
And even some of your stuff. I mean, Dr. Orange is a great example of that, where you can put that next to, an Image book, and you can say, oh, this is up to par in many ways.
yeah,
And so, where do you think that is? And even with that 41 million unemployment options and
yeah,
people getting creative in society, because when you put people back
yeah,
on the wall, they get creative.
yeah. I think so. So I think Kickstarter is actually, we talk about Diamond and and all that, but Kickstarter is actually a distribution platform for comics, and it probably would be the biggest one if we were actually counting it, as such. So I think looking at Kickstarter is something everybody should consider if they're in indie comics, either Kickstarter or maybe another crowdfunding platform. Because I know for me, I don't really buy comics that much at this. I mean, I don't really go to comics shops. Because I don't really buy mainstream comics anymore. So I pretty much just buy indie comics, and the first place that I look for them is on Kickstarter. And I think there's gotten to be a lot of people that have done that. I've just started looking at Kickstarter and say, hey, I want a comic, and I'm not, I don't need to have it today. So I want to go on a Kickstarter and I want to support this because I want to see this type of story. So I think we're seeing probably lately we're seeing fewer projects on Kickstarter, but the ones we are seeing are I mean, they seem to be pretty professional looking, and I think that's probably what we're going to see. We might see a little contraction because like I said, I think it's tough for some people to make comics now. And for other people, it might be easier. But yeah, I think that we're looking at it in a way that's we're going to see a lot of variety. We're going to probably see, we saw this with Web 2.0. We're going to see a lot of tailoring to specific audiences, and that's going to be enough. It's not going to be that you're going to have to try to catch your normal Marvel DC reader. I think that we're looking at a lot of smaller populations of comic readers, maybe people who started with manga, or people who started with indie comics, or people who started with something like Bone, and a lot of these people are going to be not your traditional comic audience. It's going to be women, racial minorities, younger people, people who started with webcomics.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, a lot of people now are coming up to creators and dropping a graphic novel in front of them, saying this is the first comic I read, and they're not
yeah,
bringing a single issue. And in many ways, I mean, I tell the Iceman story with Sin of Grace, where Iceman was almost canceled, and then Marvel was like, "Oh snap! This graphic novel sale is killing it. Oh
Yeah.
snap!" Like, and I think that's also a change, where we're also starting to
Yeah.
see a lot more graphic novel projects on Kickstarter, and it's in the comic realm, but it's not a comic book per se, but it's comics. And I think that that's a massive change that's happening. And there's a lot of projects that are going on right now that are like 100-page, anthology slash graphic novel with actual book binding. And so I think that's also in many ways the future, because I think
Yeah.
that, and then also we're starting to see bigger names come over. I mean, Charles Soule and Ryan Brown just ran a Kickstarter. Jeff Lemire's running a Kickstarter, and that's where I think a lot of stuff is going. And I think it's fascinating. And I think that in many ways, Image, more so than Marvel and DC, is somewhat under threat because Zenescope's been doing Kickstarter for a long time now. And I think
Yeah.
that a lot of Image guys are saying, well, we don't want to be in debt to Image for
Yeah.
15% before our book sells, and then 6 months later we're okay, and we're clear of that debt now. But every time we publish a new issue, you know, do we lose money? And so I think that that's a real concern versus printing it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, my uh, yeah, my daughter's 6 years old, and she reads Dogman, and that's one of her favorite things to read. And it's in a book format, but it is a comic book. And people say, "Oh, comic books don't sell." It's like, you go over to Books a Million. Look the way Dogman's selling. Look at the way Captain Underpants is selling, which is partially a comic. There's stuff that's just in slightly different formats than we're used to, but it's still comics. Like by Scott McCloud's definition, still comics. So I think we need to really think about, like I was saying, with these different audiences. I think it's really to the point where we may not be aware of things that are really outside of our interests now. It used to be you could go to the comic shop and you could see everything that you could buy. You can't do that anymore. Even if you go on Kickstarter, there's no way you could look at every single project and decide which one you want, and you're going to filter that in some way. So I think it's good in a lot of ways just to diversify the genres and diversify the styles, and everybody kind of gets what they want. And it's like the whole thing about having 1,000 fans. Like, you have 1,000 fans that can buy
1,000
everything that you
fans,
put
ten
out.
bucks a month makes you a good
What's that?
living. 1,000 fans, each paying $10 a month, makes
Yeah,
you a
yeah, yeah,
decent living. If they're paying you 100, you're doing even better. And
yeah, exactly.
and I was gonna say, because I think it's so important. If you get somebody out for $10, it seems like a big jump up to 100. But I'm doing that right now in a business where I'm getting people on at a lower level, and we're slowly increasing, their fees, and we're giving them more content. And I can't go into so many details with it, but going from $10 to $30 is not a big jump, and then going from 30 to 50 isn't a big jump. And we see that in Kickstarter. I mean, it's not that big of a jump, especially if you're running 2, 3, 4, 5 Kickstarters. Somebody loves the project. If your reward is $10 one time, and then you still have a $10 reward, but you have a $20 reward, you just jumped up double, and then all of a sudden it leads on to that. But having said all that, and I do want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself, the Kickstarter link has been up this entire time. 4 days left. When you're watching this tomorrow or the next day, it's going to be 3 days left, respectively, and 2 days left. Definitely the project is funded. I can't say that enough. So this project is happening. So that should give you some authenticity, because that does help tremendously. And it's funded 230%, I want to say, at this point, or pretty close to it. Might be 220%. It's around that number. So clearly, this is a go. And so if you want this book, you want it remastered, you want the lettering redone, want those cool Bronze Age feels, I'm promoting your book for you. I mean, please interject anytime you need to. Um, but yeah, the link is up. It's in
That's
the
okay.
comment section down below. Everybody, it's been up this entire interview. So if you're interested in this stuff and you were looking at it and saying, "Oh snap, this looks really cool," links up. It's going to be remaining up there. Just know that there's 4 days left, and then in the next 4 days, it's obviously going to go to 3, 2, 1. So check it out if you're interested. Take a look at the Kickstarter. There's a video. There's a lot of information on there, and going beyond that, because you do have a store, I'm assuming at some point this book, if it's not picked up on Kickstarter, will be on your web store. At some point, I believe the original is also on your web store. So what is your website so that people can actually just get information in general? And then what is your social media regarding your website and things like that where people can follow and support?
My website is herseystudiosllc.com. And then my Facebook page is Hersey Studios LLC, and I also have one for the Order of Dracula. And then I have a Twitter, which is Hersey Studios LL. They hit the character limit. And then I have a Hersey Studios LLC Comics on the Instagram. So that's about it. So yeah, that's the book is happening.
Yeah. And just to talk really quickly, what is available on your web store? Because you can get a bunch of these comics on your web store, and I think you get them physical as well as digital for most of them.
So we don't have all the digital on there because I ran out of web hosting service space. But yeah, we have some of the digital
definitely
on there.
Physical though, definitely physical.
Yeah, all the physical stuff is on there. We have a Comixology, which has some of the comics, but they're not all up there yet. And there's a link to that from there. So there's also a link to all of our social media pages and mailing lists and all that stuff.
Well, we're going to leave it at that, but I'd like to thank you for being on because I always love interviewing people. I think this is interesting. I'm actually very excited to see where you go. Clearly you have a lot to choose from. And so I think there is something for everybody here, whether you want ultra horror or you want more of a spin on Dracula, or you just like the psychological thriller stuff. There's a bunch of stuff to check out. And I've been saying it to everybody here is that there's no excuse now not to follow anybody on social media. If you got extra money, you're interested, pledge to the Kickstarter, check it out. Check out some of the other works that he has out there. Definitely check out the website, take a look, read the description to see what's interesting to you or what's going on with all of that. So definitely do that, as well as if you are pressed for money, take care of your family first. I've been saying this to everybody in the 32 interviews that I've conducted so far. But unless you don't have electricity or internet and you think this stuff is awesome and cool, follow somebody. Follow their Twitter, Facebook page, check out the website, follow them on Instagram. Because again, as I stated, if you're shy of electricity and internet, there are no more excuses. And also engage, liking, retweeting, commenting, saying, hey, I just saw this is really cool, because that affects the algorithm. And that's just as important as picking up a comic book. Because if you share something, it lets other people know, hey, I think this is cool, maybe you'd like it too. And that's a big deal. I always appreciate when somebody does that, and I'd imagine you appreciate it too.
Yep, you said it all. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure. Thank you for being on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let me know. I'll come back anytime you need me.
Oh, definitely we're going to do something for your next Kickstarter. I assure you and everybody else.
Thank you.